Hi kawan, welcome to EDCReady. Today we are doing a full review of this guy. This is the CRKT assisted squid. So this guy, I bought it from, let's see now, gearevo.com, and I will have a link down below. That will be an affiliate link. And if you want early access to all my content and my giveaways, do check out the Patreon down below and help support the channel. So this guy came to my table late last year. I think it's going to be I've been carrying this guy for about a month, or slightly more than a month. So I think I have a pretty good feel about what this knife is all about. But before that, let's get into some specs. We have here a spear point blade that is kind of like half ground. Is this a flat grind? No, this is a hollow grind, a half height hollow grind. Okay, we have here a blade length of just under 2.5 inches. We have here a handle length of 3.56 inches, which is great. We have here a total width of about 1.24 inches, and then we have a thickness of 0.37 inches. So very thin handle thickness. And let's measure the blade thickness. We are coming in at, let's see now, come here. We're coming in at 0.15 inches, so a relatively thick blade for a relatively thin handle. One final dimension I want to talk about is this, the weight here. Let's zeroize it. It is in grams. Hopefully you guys can see that. Zeroize. This comes in at 105 grams, which is actually around 3.7 ounces for just under 2.5 inches of blade. So relatively weighty kind of guy, relatively dense kind of guy. So now let's get into the review from tip to butt. So let's talk about this blade shape. I am not a fan of this blade shape. The blade itself is 8CR13 MOV, which is very much a budget steel. But a couple of things that I don't like about it. Number one is I'm not a fan of a spear point, because a spear point doesn't actually have a sharp tip. Oh, okay, let me rephrase that. The tip is not gonna be as pokey as, let's say, a drop point blade like this. This has a nice pokey tip right there. See, nice and pokey. This guy, because it kind of just ends up like a 50-50 kind of situation here, it doesn't really come to a sharp tip, and this is not actually sharpened at the tip for some reason. It's kind of rounded off. Don't know if you guys can see that. Yeah, it's kind of rounded off. And because of that, like, I couldn't pop a balloon. I can't even pop a balloon. A blown up balloon, I can't really pop it with this guy. I couldn't. I had to switch to my Ganzo to pop the balloon. So that's an unfortunate thing. I do use a lot more of a penetrating cut. I don't do a lot of slicing with my EDC gear. I do a lot of poking into things. So sharp tip is going to be quite important for me. It also has very little belly, which I do like. And then this flat portion is not actually flat. If I have a flat surface here, you can actually see that it's actually curving a little bit. Like, it's not exactly flat onto the platform there. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah. There's just the slightest bit of curvature here, which is unfortunate. And that's probably because of a bad sharpening thing. It does have a sharpening choil, so if you sharpen it yourself, you might get it back completely flat. But that's kind of like unfortunate. Next thing is that this is not really thin behind the edge. As you can see, it started off from a relatively thick edge at 0.15 inches, which is actually thicker than my ZT at 0.12. It is about the same thickness as my Para 3 lightweight, but the Para 3 lightweight is a full flat ground for a very tall blade, so it comes to a nice thin edge, or at least a thinner edge. This guy is quite thick, 0.15 inches, but it is but the grind only starts halfway down the blade. And even then, even though it's a hollow grind here, it doesn't really help with thinning out the edge. This is a relatively thick edge knife, so you're definitely want to be doing your own sharpening for two reasons: to really thin out this edge here, and to add a much more pokey tip up here. It does have a nice finish. It has this kind of a black stone washy kind of finish, which I do enjoy. I think it's quite pretty. It kind of has that little stealth look, which I kind of like. One thing I do like about this is that it has jimping up here, and then the jimping is like perfectly placed. Like where my thumb falls, that's where the jimping is placed at, and it's pretty much dead on where I want it to be. Now, if you want to choke up a little bit higher, you can. This does add a little bit of a ramp for this part of your thumb. So it does ergonomically fit your thumb quite well, this blade. So I really like that. The thumb studs are nice. They do stick out just a little bit beyond the scales, which is nice. You can definitely get some good grip from that guy. And especially when you pair it with the assist, it really is very easy to get to, even on the reverse hand, even on your Spidey finger flick. Very, very nice. Moving back a little bit, let's talk about the pivot. The pivot here is T8. Nice and deep pivot screws. So I really do enjoy that. The body handles are T6. Now, this is an assisted knife. So the difference between an assisted knife and a non-assisted knife is that once you get past a certain level, once you get past the detent on a non-assisted knife, there's nothing really pushing out the blade. Okay, and that's why it's so smooth. Because then you gotta get tolerances straight, and then it's just smooth to close it. With an assisted knife, you have a little spring. You can check out my disassembly video for more info. You have a little spring that goes, I think, on this side. Yeah, you have a little spring on the inside here that has a little bit of a coil, and then it jabs into a little hole inside of the blade. So what happens is, as you get past a certain point, okay, you can see that there's a spring, and then the spring it's completely loose here because there's no spring tension. But once you get past 90 degrees or so, you're gonna feel that spring kick back on it. See, just like that. Now that has a few advantages. The first of which is that no matter what condition the knife is in, no matter what bearings, no matter what pivot it uses, whether it's on bearings or washers or plastic washers, no matter if it's dirty, if there's gunk or mud in it, it will fly out. Once you start pushing this beyond the detent or so, if you can call it a detent, once you get it past that spring tension, it's going to fly out. And you do that with the flipper, you can do that with the thumb studs, even pulling it out, yeah, it can still flick out. So that's the advantage of that. The disadvantage of that is that, number one, it can be a little bit fiddly to unlock the knife and push it down. CRKT does this better than a lot of other companies. I've held some M-Techs that are kind of dangerous to kind of close it with one hand because there's so much spring tension. The CRKTs, they do this quite well, but you definitely don't have that mechanical fall shut action that a lot of knife nerds prefer. Okay, another thing that catches people off guard is that they don't expect this flick open. It's different from my Kershaw that I had before, which is an automatic knife where you just press a button and it flicks out, because that uses a different kind of mechanism. It uses a spring as well, but instead of pushing something on the blade to flick it open, you press a button and you don't even touch the blade at all and it flicks out. That makes it an automatic knife, which makes me wonder, like, what is the real difference between that and pressing a little flipper tab here and having it flick out? But you know, that's for the lawmakers to talk about. So that is the disadvantage of a spring assisted knife. So those are the pros and cons of a spring assisted knife. Now next up, let's move back a little bit. Let's talk about the handles. The handles here are a similarly black stonewash steel, and this whole thing is steel, and then there is no skeletonization on the inside here. There's no like weight reduction cutouts on the inside, which actually makes it quite heavy. As you saw on the scale, it is 3.7 ounces for a 2.4 inch blade, which makes it really heavy for its size. Just to have a few comparisons, you have this guy. This is Gonzo G10, and it uses steel liners on the inside, but they are skeletonized. So this guy comes in quite a bit. I think this is about 3 ounces. And then once you get to the higher end stuff, you have like carbon fiber and titanium. This guy is 2.2 ounces, so quite a bit lighter, but also quite a bit more expensive. Something like this guy, which is running on FRN, also really light. This is coming in at about 2.6, 2.7 ounces, something like that. So do keep that in mind. Some people do like the weight. I actually quite like a slightly heftier feel on a thin knife, on a small knife, because I've had small knives before that just feel really light because of how small they are, and then the extra weight can actually make it a little bit more controllable. The Benchmade Bug Out, much bigger knife, is about the size of this guy, but way lighter. It is about half the weight of this guy, and it comes to a point that certain knives, as much as I like them to be light, sometimes having a small knife with a little bit of weight has actually improved the usage experience in my hands. Now, let's talk about the Lockbar. Lockbar is very good. It stops at about 60-odd%. See if I can show it to you. There we go. Oh, actually no, a little bit longer. It stops at about 70%. So it's very good. It locks up really solid. Just listen to this. That's a solid sounding lockup. And and you can hear that the actual steel frame is actually quite hard. So when I first got this, I actually found myself, because I'm not used to this kind of hardness, I actually found myself having to press that way quite a lot. Now, it doesn't have a over travel stop, so be careful. You don't want to over push it to the point that you kind of bend it too much in that direction. But unless you have like crazy like bodybuilder hands, you're a mountain climber, something like that, I don't think that's going to be a problem for most people. But do keep that in mind, this is a little bit hard to push over. The jimping on the inside here is relatively I wouldn't say harsh, but you definitely feel it in your hands when you jam it here, because you don't have a lot of space here. When you don't have a lot of space here, you're really jamming your fingers into a very tight space, and then sometimes it can kind of leave a little bit of divot inside of your thumb flesh right there. Can you see that? Yeah. Now let's talk about the deployment. We have a flipper here. It's actually a nice flipper tab. It is very minimal, and it has some nice jimping at the top here. Coupled with the fact that this is assisted, they don't really need to dial in the shape of the flipper tab like this guy. This flipper tab is pretty much the perfect type of flipper tab. The most perfect flipper tab I've ever used is on this guy. Another one here is this guy. Also has some nice jimping, a little bit higher as well, because these are manual, so you need that extra leverage to really flick it open, especially if the pivot's a little bit rough. But this guy, you just don't need that amount of leverage. The minute you get it past, it's like the perfect amount of flipper tab. The minute you get it past, see, without the flipper tab actually going under the scale, it's still not in firing mode. But once you get it past that, yeah. So the flipper tab is like the perfect size for the action here. Thumb studs, already mentioned, are quite nice. Now, this assembly of this guy was a little bit rough. I'm not sure why. There was no like Loctite or whatever that I can remember, but do keep in mind this pivot can be quite difficult to get it open the first time. Maybe they just really tightened it. Body screws are just fine. Okay, the pivot did have a lot of grease. Now you are gonna find a lot of grease when you open this guy up. Grease inside of the scales and grease inside the pivot itself, and that actually I believe just helps keep it like running like no matter what. It's the kind of grease that dust won't really go into. Sometimes when you use something like what I use here, like it kind of like keeps the dust or whatever in suspension, whereas the grease here, it doesn't really let anything like go into those particular areas because it is just that viscous. That being said, I did take it apart. The wonderful thing about assisted knives is that you never really ever need to take it apart. I just took it apart to kind of educate myself and to show you guys how an assisted knife works, but you really just don't ever need to take it apart. It will, barring something breaking on the inside, it will always work and it will always like shoot out. So that's great. Moving back a little bit, you have this plastic lanyard hole. It's not really a lanyard hole because it's kind of like long and flat. I call it a ribbon hole. So it has a nice ribbon hole if you guys want to tie a lanyard or ribbon. In fact, with a knife this small, having that little bit, especially if you have bigger hands than mine, having that little bit of extra length with the lanyard might actually give you a much better purchase on this guy. So you can actually just hold it with the lanyard and the bead itself. That might actually give some ergonomic advantages to this guy. So speaking of ergonomic advantages, you have some nice edges to the scale itself. Now the scale is quite flat, okay, so there's no texturing on the scale. You do have chamfered and rounded edges all the way around, so that actually helps the ergonomic. This is surprisingly quite an ergonomic knife for how small it is. The pocket clip is a little high, so you do feel it in the meat of your hand a little bit, but it compensates it by having all this chamfering on the outside. Speaking of the pocket clip, this is an amazing pocket clip. It's a deep carry pocket clip, although with the lanyard hole, not so deep carry. But it is just like the perfect shape in my opinion. It has the perfect tension. It has everything I love about pocket clip. It is over the top kind of pocket clip, so it's nice and deep carry. The screws, because they're on the side, it doesn't really get in the way of the pants, even though it actually sticks out into the pocket clip a little bit. But because it's on the side, like the Benchmade bug out, it actually it doesn't really get caught up in the pants. It has nice rounded edges in the back here. You have a nice flat bill that comes out from the tip of it, so you don't get that sharp edge that you get in some pocket clips. Do I have any to show? No, but I've had some pocket knives where this little flat portion doesn't exist, and then it just points upwards at the tip here, and then that actually creates an even bigger ergonomic hotspot. You have a lot of ramp here for your pens to go in and out. For me, what I like to do is I like to put my fingers underneath the pocket clip and lift it up before pushing it into my pens. So, and then it has really good tension, so I really like about that. So that is pretty much everything about the knife. In conclusion, what do I think about this knife? Will I buy this knife? And the answer is it does have a purpose, and I do have something in my life that requires this knife and the purpose of this knife. This is a great loaner knife because I take a knife to work. Sometimes I work in production, so sometimes my knife will be used in production, and sometimes I am carrying my ZT, or sometimes I am carrying my ProTech Malibu. And sometimes my production guys or girls will come to me and be like, "Hey Real, can I use your knife to cut this prop?" Or, "Hey Real, can we borrow your knife to do an unboxing video for our channel?" And sometimes I'm a little bit apprehensive about giving them this guy or this guy to use. I won't feel that apprehensive about giving this guy for them to use for a few reasons. Number one, full steel frame lock, assisted action. I know this guy can really take a beating, and I don't need to worry about them cracking or scratching this gorgeous carbon fiber, or I don't need to worry about them chipping the tip of my 20 CV of my ProTech Malibu. This is a knife that, as I said, is a great loaner knife. If someone comes to my table and wants to borrow a knife for whatever and I can't follow them, this will be the knife that I pass to them. Be like, "Hey, just so you know, it does have a spring, so be careful when it flicks open. This is how you disengage it, but you don't need to worry when you use it. Just use it however you wish. It's going to be inexpensive enough to replace in case of any emergency, and it is easy enough to use, and it is sturdy enough to use. And a lot of people won't get won't get intimidated by this guy as they would with these two guys right here. Okay guys, that is all. Thank you for the review. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to all my content and access to my giveaways, and stay ready.